Hello and welcome back to Dry Conversations. I'm your host, Whitney Cowell. Joining me today is Matthew Leffler.
Whitney, thank you so much for having me on the program. I am such an enormous fan of what you were doing here, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to speak to you and to your audience today.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm glad to have you back on Dry Conversations instead of the former podcast. It's always a good time when we get to chat. For anybody that doesn't know you or hasn't met you before, why don't you give us a quick rundown of who you are and what you've been up to these days?
I appreciate that. Well, my name is Matthew Leffler. I am a lawyer. I've been practicing law since 2010. Many people know me as the Armchair attorney. It's a trademark that I own, as well as a law firm that I operate. These days, I do a whole bunch of different things. I serve on the board of a company called Velocity. It's an incredible business based in Kansas City. I am a senior counsel for a law firm called Taylor Nelson down in Florida. And I'm also an adjunct law professor at Michigan State University College of Law. Go Green. I hope Grace Sharkey is watching or listening. And in the background, my twins are having lunch and they are screaming and squawking in delight, I believe. So it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate you, like I said, being back, and we will tag Grace in this.
So there you go. Absolutely.
Well, one of the things I wanted to talk about, because it's come up a couple of times in conversation with us, is the topic of mental health. That you and I both have our own stories and our own journeys and our own life experiences that have brought us to a place where we take healing very seriously. We take our mental state very seriously. And so I know you had a pretty interesting story, if we want to just jump right in, about your childhood and how that shaped you to who you are today.
I really appreciate that. And I don't really talk about this publicly a lot. Most people don't know this about me. But what I am very fortunate to have today is the ability to speak and communicate in a way that people understand and can appreciate. But that wasn't always the case. When I was really young, I had a very pronounced speech impediment. I had a really bad stutter. And I also had vocal nodules, which are bumps on your vocal cords. So when I would speak, it would sound incredibly raspy, and it would also be almost incomprehensible. And so people, I would kind of describe it as a mixture of, Porky Pig meets Donald Duck. And when I was a kid, I was viciously bullied. I was small for my age, and the way that the bullies would call me, one of the nicknames at least, was the duck call boy. So my voice would sound like a duck call. And I spent years and years in speech therapy trying to overcome the stutter. And to this day, if I get really excited or I get a little bit energized, I may start to stutter. So for me, it's this exercise in thinking about what I'm going to say and then slowing down. But that was such a profound impact on me as a kid and really helped build up my anxiety and depression generally. And there's something that to this day defines a lot of who I am and something I think about all the time because that was who I was when I was that little.
Right. And that I'm sure that had a really big impact on you in those formative years as you're growing and you're learning your identity and what that means. I mean, that's an incredibly difficult, situation. And bullying is like a whole nother topic and something that I don't stand for. I was bullied too, but for different reasons. And so I'm wondering, as you grew, how did that impact the way that like you viewed yourself and the way that you now parent?
When I was little, my father, when I was born, I say in 1985, my dad had been working for Roadway for about a decade. And so he spent a lot of his time on the road and he was in maintenance, not on operations, but he was a maintenance guy. And I remember trucking transportation as, really meant my father was gone for at least half the year. That's what it typically meant. And when you're little, the thing that I would look forward to is the 1 minute that I would get to talk to my father when he was traveling. I'd hop on the phone and say, "Dad, how are you doing?" And he would talk to me. And it was really like this kind of surface level. Everything was good. Everything's fine. And then you'd move on. You didn't bring problems like that from in my childhood to my folks. And I wrestle with this stuff a lot. I didn't know how to ask for help, and I didn't know it was happening to me was something that was not normal. I just knew that I was somebody that was targeted, and I was viciously made fun of and beaten up. And as I got older, things obviously started to change. It took me 5 years of speech therapy to overcome the stutter. I had surgery on my throat to get rid of the vocal nodules. And it wasn't until I got into like high school where I started to really kind of become someone different than what I had originally thought of myself as. Now, as a parent today, I love to have difficult conversations. And I do this with my clients in my practice is we don't need to just sugarcoat everything and be positive. Social media is a good example of putting on the best possible veneer you can see. And so only the best things are possible. And we know that that's not what life is. Most people struggle with any number of addictions or mental health issues. And it's important to understand those and realize you're not alone because, my gosh, this is the loneliest society we've ever had. People don't have as many friends as they used to. People are isolated. It's a different world than it was when I was a kid.
It really is. And to your point, everybody has a struggle. And I think when we start, and I talked about this with somebody else on a different episode, but when we start comparing our struggles with others, I think it keeps us in that place of loneliness instead of starting to discover those overlaps where we find that support in that community through our struggles. Because I don't know about you, but everything that I've struggled with, and alcoholism is not the only thing for me, right? Like I have had a lot of experiences that have been very painful and very difficult to navigate. And in all of those, I have found at least one other person that has experienced that same thing, right? Is the moment that I start asking for help and I start sharing, if that person can't help, they can point me in the right direction. And when I can shift my mindset into that, and when we, as people and as a society start normalizing those conversations, we begin to see those commonalities. And for me, not feeling alone was something that I didn't think was possible.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. I think there's this belief that some people have that the default way we should feel is to be happy. And I don't think that. I mean, I love to be happy, but the reality is like it's it's about being able to do things that you find some joy in and be able to persevere through things that aren't that enjoyable. And when we have this emptiness, we fill it with something. Something has to fill it, whether it's work or it's alcohol or it's other substances or it's other maladaptive coping mechanisms, video games, our cell phones, anything we can to take away that void. And I didn't really start to fully appreciate this until I had a chance to work with my father, worked at his company. We ended up growing the business and selling it, and he retired. And I became addicted to work. And I realized that if I tried to leave it, I had a non competition agreement as part of the sale of the business. I couldn't do what I thought I was born to do. And it was this exercise in pulling the plug and living with the non compete and doing something different that helped me figure out, okay, there's other things that exist. There's other ways to define yourself.
Mhm.
And I also found there's millions of people who struggle with the same sort of thing. And how do they reconcile their identity with what they do and find other ways to find joy in a world that is very chaotic and very, very stressful?
Yeah. And I think it's really easy to lose ourselves. Like you said, that piece of identity, when we continue to put those put pieces of our identity, large pieces of our identity in things that we have that can fail us, and all of our hope in those things that can fail us, it can be really scary when they do. Like if my entire identity was in my job, well, I've been laid off twice.
Yeah.
um and there was I realized just how tied up, it was in that role and in that experience, because I felt so useless. And one of them was a month after I came back from my honeymoon. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden I felt like I have nothing to bring to the marriage, and we're no longer equally yoked. And my husband, he's so gracious, said, I really think that you should just rest. I think that you should enjoy this time. And it never crossed my mind that, like, I don't have, and I'm not somebody that's addicted to work. I very much advocate for my
Yeah.
work-life balance. As a neurodivergent person, I have to have separation. But I cannot imagine the struggle of somebody who is that workaholic, so to speak, that finds so much of their worth in their job.
Absolutely. I mean, we as Americans, when you meet someone for the first time, you ask their name and then you ask what they do.
Mhm.
And what is it that you do? Is it the job you perform, your hobbies, your identity as a Christian, for example, or other things? Like we have conflated identity with what we do, with the people we work for. And I remember being laid off on Christmas Eve. And it's like that was like really awful. And I realized as time went on that we need to build up these different communities and these different networks. And a lot of the time that I spend is helping people bridge the gap between this transition. And the transitions are when you're at the absolute worst part of your life, when you don't have this thing that you've been doing for such a long time and have to reinvent yourself. And I think that's what really has kind of driven me into this place of trying to advocate for people that are in positions of less power versus someone who has more power, and trying to navigate those so that they get an outcome that is better than when they've gotten by themselves.
Yeah, and I love that you're doing that. That because you are a supporter of people. I mean, you've helped me in those seasons of transition where, like you said, when we ask people, what they do, I read it in a book where it was a challenge of anytime somebody says that, don't say your job.
Yeah, that's
You know,
right.
and I'm very comfortable in certain situations just saying, like my name's Whitney, I'm an alcoholic, and it just kind of is what it is. But like I can also say my name's Whitney and I'm an amateur gardener. I take ballet. I think a pretty good friend.
Mhm.
I am at a point in my life now where I can say that. And I have not been able to say those things. So as my life evolves, my identity and who I am and what drives me every day is also allowed to change. And I think that that's the positive of anybody that feels stuck or hopeless in their situation, is that you're allowed to change.
That's right. I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to get to help you in different things. I've helped others, and what I love to do is people will find me on, they'll find me on Twitter. I'm not going to call it X; it's still the Sears Tower for me as well. They'll find me on Reddit or LinkedIn, and they'll say, "Hey, I got this thing. Can you help me understand it?" Most Americans could not come up with $400 or $500 in 24 hours. It's just not possible. And so a lot of the work I do is pro bono, helping someone understand what they've agreed to. And then if I have the opportunity to negotiate against someone else, I love to bully bullies. Like that's one of my favorite things in the world. When I get the opportunity, is we think about bullying from the perspective of kids, but it happens as adults. Like
All the time.
absolutely. And I'm a professionally trained bully. That's what the law degree allows me to do. And so I do take joy in being able to help people understand things. And a lot of what people see me do when I speak at conferences or go on other podcasts and things is breaking down complicated legal things, because I do fundamentally believe most people can understand the topics that are affecting this country or the world. You just have to make it in a way that's entertaining and digestible. And that's what I hope to do with the stuff that I work on.
Right. And as somebody who has sat at a coffee shop in a group of people just listening to you talk about legal cases that are happening in the supply chain, and my boss and I talked for half an hour afterwards, we're like, well, we could have just sat there for 2 more hours. Because it's making, like you said, it's not just entertaining, it's putting it in a through a lens and through a filter that makes it attainable knowledge. And sometimes like we don't understand what we don't understand. And I love that you said your favorite thing is to bully bullies, because it does, like, small pivot, that it does happen in the workforce and as in our adulthood. And I've experienced that inside and outside of work. And I know, like, specifically in the supply chain in certain circles, it's a really hot topic right now. And I've thrown a story or two out there just because I've also experienced it. And there's nothing like looking somebody in the eyes and saying truth and be able to just mic drop and walk away.
Yeah, I mean, this is stuff that I take great pleasure in. Is you get someone who gets laid off and they have a restrictive covenant, like a non-solicit or a non-compete, and they don't know what they're allowed to do, and their company sends them like a mean letter. Because when someone gets let go, you're still bound generally by the post employment restrictive covenants. And there's nothing more enjoyable than like jumping in on behalf of the client saying, hey, my name is Matthew Leffler. I represent such and such. Do not speak to them directly unless you talk to me. And it's interesting that you say you have these documents because under these different little things, you've missed it. And obviously this is not enforceable. So let's have a different conversation. And they immediately start going backpedaling because they're not used to dealing with somebody who is going to go to the mat to win for my client. And I find what we see in this country generally to be something we should be suspicious of. I mean, the use of restrictive covenants, it's 30 million people have a non-compete, probably 60 have non-solicits.
Yeah.
And these are for people that are making 20 bucks an hour. I mean, it's a different world. And these things really do frustrate me. So it helps to be able to talk about these things in ways that hopefully people find interesting and helpful.
Yeah. And I think that we all have that kind of power within us. And you
Absolutely.
don't have to be somebody who's gone to law school and understands how to have these types of conversations to be an advocate for people that you feel are underserved or suffering some sort of injustice. I mean, you just don't. And I think we've all had experiences that have shaped us negatively. And we've also had these experiences that have shaped us positively. Any person that has had the chance for you to advocate for them now has had such a positive experience where they can spread that hope, that joy, that, you know, this was my light at the end of the tunnel, which means there's one for you too. And that's why I think it's so powerful to use our voices and the gifts that we have, because we can use them to tear others down or we can use them to build others up. And that type of control is something that it's a choice that we get to make.
Yeah, I love that you bring up the gift, and I'm going to take a brief kind of segue to kind of talk about my own faith, my journey of faith, and the gifts that I've been given. When I was a kid, the gifts that I thought that I had was the ability to run fast. Like that was the thing that really was like that motivated me. But I also knew that I had this gift, for lack of a better word, of the ability to not communicate with people. And everyone thought that I was developmentally challenged. I was in special education services because I didn't seem like a normal kid. And I would chafe at these ideas. And I grew up Catholic, and I found myself hating my faith and my God. I thought, why would they punish me? My father was gone. Everyone made fun of me. It was a brutal existence for a bit. And many people have it far worse than I ever did. Far, far worse.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it was brutal. And it didn't take until like in my mid to early 30s that I rediscovered my faith. And I realized that the gift that God gave me was not a gift that I just got to take for granted. I had to work for it. I had to work in order to speak in a way that could resonate with people. And to this day, I now see my own journey of faith is this struggle through understanding and finding through faith that I don't have to understand everything. I just have to have a place to direct my gratitude, which I have so much to be grateful for. And I'm just very happy and blessed to be able to talk to you and to talk to others about, you know, how do you overcome things that are disabilities at the beginning, but can also bring you so much catharsis when you master them or overcome them.
Right. And what a gift to, like you said, to not have to always be, to not have to have it all figured out, right? To, like you said, I have a place for my gratitude, and that's enough. That is what I need. Because, you know, as somebody who is a neurodivergent person, is an addict, has experienced quite a few things, you know, I could, so that like list at the doctor where it's like, have you ever, and specifically like at a therapist's office, for me, it's like, check.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't have to figure out how those experiences are going to be used. I just have to be like obedient and trust that they can be. And I think there's so much freedom in knowing, like, I'm not going to get to know the outcome every time. I don't have to plan it out. I don't have to figure it out. I don't have to make this roadmap for myself. I can just be thankful that every day I wake up and the road continues forward.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I want to talk about, and it's difficult to talk about it, is like when you build yourself up into something and then you're not the thing you thought you were. And being a lawyer, we're kind of a special group of neurodivergence in a lot of different ways. We have some of the highest rates of problematic drinking and
Mhm.
anxiety and suicidal ideation. And
Lots
I
of
myself
statistics.
had those. I thought the world would be better off if I wasn't around. I didn't want to be a participant in everything. I thought it was easier just to say, look, I don't want to do this anymore. There's other, I want to just be done with it. And it's being able to feel those feelings because it's not bad to have bad thoughts. It's
Mhm.
the actions that you do with it and how you can use that to do something different. And so for me, it was just overcoming this part of myself that I was deeply ashamed of, deeply frustrated with, and then finding something that I could bring that was positive from it. And it was just a very interesting struggle as a young man. And now I'm 40, so I'm halfway to 80 or a third of the way to 120 as the math works out. And I'm finally, for the most part, comfortable and at peace with where I've come from and where I'm going.
Well, thank you for sharing that because that is, I mean, that's a very vulnerable thing to talk about and not one that's even really come up on my show yet. But, unfortunately, like you said, the profession that you're in, there are some really staggering statistics that are absolutely heartbreaking. And I think there's a lot of factors that go into why it is what it is. There's a lot of industries that have these types of trends within them. And I think what is helpful for me is knowing that it's not just this group of people. It is also like, then it's this group of people, but maybe the statistics are a little bit different. And so
Yeah.
there's this, what helps here can help here too. Um, and the suicidal ideations, I can completely relate to that. We were talking about that before we started
Yeah.
recording of when everything hurts so bad or is so confusing and so overwhelming that you just say, it might be easier if I just don't.
Yeah.
And that's a very real thought. And to your point, the statistics that we know are just the ones that are reported. And I firmly believe that there are so many more that don't report, that aren't filling those things out, or that aren't sharing truthfully, that also fall into that bucket and that have had those thoughts. I guarantee you, somebody that listens to this episode, and I don't have a huge following, has probably also had those feelings.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the thing I find, and I don't know if this is true, but it feels like it might be useful, is that when other people talk about it, it demystifies it and shows that it's not just you. It's not just isolated to specifically you having the problem. It is a normal part of the human existence to feel like you're not good enough and to fill that void with something. And then you fill with the something, and maybe that something isn't enough. And you start circling and ruminating, and it gets darker and darker. And you go, why do I even want to try it again tomorrow? Is tomorrow going to be any bit different than it was the day before? Are they going to be any nicer to me? Or is it going to be any more pleasant? And I think that things do find a way of working out. I think ultimately there is a plan for everybody, but being able to share the stories and share the scars helps others realize. Like the stutter is a really good example. The data is interesting, and I like to learn about it because it was something that I dealt with. It's really hard to overcome a stutter. It's super hard. The data is really stark, and I've talked to people who have kids that have learning disabilities or stutters or other abnormalities or neurodivergent things, and I think that they have all kind of been of the opinion like, man, it's great to hear someone else dealt with this and they've overcome it, or maybe they found a way to deal with it in a way that was productive. And I think that's what helps generate, people to be less lonely and to understand we're all struggling with something. And it helps us give grace to people. Like everybody I meet, I assume they're having the worst day of their life. And my hope is, can I just make you smile? Can I make you laugh? Can I tell you something that you might find interesting? And that has been something that I have been very happy that I get to do with people is hopefully entertain them, educate them, and give them something to be excited about.
You are working on a project that does just that. I apologize. I let my dog out. My husband did. But the I completely agree. I just completely agree. I think and the, overcoming a speech impediment, that is something that I did not know the statistics for. And after we talked, I went and looked it up, and it's, I am married to somebody who, in certain moments of stress, a stutter does present
Yeah.
itself. And it is the numbers are a lot different than I thought they would be, I guess. Because I've known somebody who's a speech therapist, and I guess I just didn't realize, A, how common it is, but B, how difficult it is to overcome. And that right there was just a lack of education on my part, right? And now that I know, there, like you said, there's this space for empathy where I don't have to know and understand every little detail, but I can take you saying, like, it's incredibly difficult, and say, you know what, I believe that. And I'm so grateful that you shared that. And now I have empathy moving forward for other people, where it's like, I love that, I know that that's got to be really tough. I don't know how, but I know that it is. And I think there's that kind of kindness just doesn't cost anything.
It's so interesting because, like, we've talked for such a long time. We've been friends for a while. When I was really young, um, during the same time as the speech impediment, all the other things, I was playing with my older brother, and we had a wooden swing set, and most people have swing sets, but our swings themselves were also made of wood. And I was chasing my older brother, and he pushed the swing up, and it fell right back, right into my mouth. And it smashed my 4 front teeth. Now, they were all baby teeth. So eventually they grew back after like 2 years. But, like, imagine you're like 8 or 9 years old. You're already viciously bullied because everyone thinks you're an idiot. Everyone thinks that there's something manifestly wrong with you. And just speaking with you is enough for them to know this person is different than me.
Yeah.
And then I had no teeth for years. And I look at my life now, and I get compliments like, Matt, I love the way that you speak. I love the way that you communicate. And it's all the microphone. It's nothing that I do. But I take a deeper appreciation for that. And the
Mhm.
same token, if I hear someone has a stutter, it immediately puts me in this very difficult mental place where I'm immediately very like, that you shouldn't do that. Like, you shouldn't speak that way. You need to practice. You can practice. You can practice. And I'd practice myself for hours to get past my own speech impediment. And it's these biases that we come across over time. And everybody is wrestling with massive challenges. And
Yeah.
I take a lot of solace knowing that I am not alone in my suffering. And none of us really are alone in our suffering. We just suffer individually, but we share the same types of things that make our life so difficult.
Right.
And it's an interesting thing to hear people today say, "Oh, you sound like a normal person." I didn't know that for most of my childhood. I had no concept of that.
Yeah. And I have my own version of that. And I think, if, for me, I have ADHD, and I was diagnosed really young. And I had a very hard time staying just engaged in anything. I was great at athletics because I could hyper focus on the thing that I needed to do, finish, be done, be social, be whatever. And I was like always on the, so I was a very strong, very fast, very flexible kid. And so, I did really well in some situations, but when I got into a group situation, I would be so uncomfortable. Um, and I remember a kid, this it hurt my feel. I cried about it for days. And as an adult, I can giggle because I've been to therapy. Um, but this kid at practice told me to take a chill pill, and I had missed my dose of medication that day. And it really
Oh,
hurt my feelings because she didn't know, but I was like, I forgot it. And and now all of a sudden I'm like that freak that's on the team that, like, is spazzing out and just kind of all over the place, but, like, and I barely finishing a thought. And that was really uncomfortable, and as an adult, I am not medicated, but I also have these coping mechanisms and these things that I've learned to do that help me stay very present. To this day, if you give me a list of more than 4 things to do, I'm going to remember 2 of them, and I can't help it. Like, you're going to have to write it down or text it to me. And I don't mean to be like
yeah.
airheaded about it. I can't do it, and that's okay. I've learned. I know how to communicate that to other people. And, especially as an addict, there are certain situations that make me very uncomfortable. And I
Mhm.
know how to remove myself. I didn't know how to do that until somebody showed me and talked me through it. And then somebody showed me this grace when I actually implemented my boundaries to know that that's a safe thing to do. And if they
Yeah.
don't think that, if somebody doesn't agree with that now, like if I say, no, thank you, I'm not drinking, and somebody buys me a shot and walks up with it, at some sort of event, because that has happened.
Oh,
In my recovery as somebody in the supply chain who was at an event, and I was like, "Oh, you should hand that off to somebody else." And I just walked out and,
yeah.
like, didn't look back, and
Good for
and that's
you.
okay. As as adults, we have so much more knowledge and emotional capacity than we do as kids, and I think it's really important to try to teach that to kids and to meet the kids that we know that are struggling where they're at. Um, because they're doing their best. I mean, you were doing your best.
It's interesting you bring up like the athletic side of things. Like I loved athletics. I was a runner. I was a football player. My claim to fame, if I ever had a claim to fame, was in 2003. I was second in the state of Illinois in the 400-meter dash. So I was really good at running in an oval. But my identity was wrapped into this thing, and I got to compete in Division 1 athletics. Few people get to do that. I was mediocre at doing it, and they cut my program. So I was at Western Michigan. I was a Bronco, and they cut the indoor track, the outdoor track, and the men's cross country and the women's synchronized skating. And they said, like, look, the budget doesn't allow this, and there's no fans. I'm like, I agree to that. I'm looking in the stands, like no one is there watching me run in ovals, and I had to reinvent myself. And I was very fortunate, I think, because when I was very young, I had to constantly reinvent myself. I
Yeah.
had to be someone new. I had to do something different. And that builds resilience. And
Mhm.
even though I'm not an athlete anymore, I'm very far away from being an athlete. I do remember like those were the things that were very simple. There was very little gray. It was like you ran fast or you didn't, and that was all it needed. And today things are a lot more gray. But those lessons you learn early on is like, how do I manage my time? How do I deal with people that disagree with me? And you learn through the process of trial and error. And I'm very fortunate that I've erred a lot, so I've learned a ton. And now I get to take that wisdom, we'll call it, and help other people navigate really tough things.
Yeah.
Because even like, someone has a non-compete or non-solicit, and they have these options and they're trying to figure things out. They're usually unhappy with what they're doing. And it's like, you can do something different. You
Yeah.
can get away from these things by not doing the same thing. And it's this getting people to know that they are far more powerful than they have any idea.
Yeah. And that's a big one, right? Like you said, the idea of reinventing yourself. I love that. And my first thought was, selfish thought was like, oh yeah, I kind of did that too. But the way I did that was, as an adult, like, you're very comfortable with types of change. I'm very comfortable meeting new people because I always felt like I didn't know how to keep friends around because I was
Hmm.
that weird kid. But I would put myself out there. So I was very comfortable being by myself. I entertain the mess out of myself. Like, I think I am great company, but not everybody felt that way. And as a child, not everybody felt that way. And so as I've gotten older, it's one of those things where I have a very, very, very small inner circle, but
Yeah.
my outer circle is massive because I welcome just about anybody because I know how it feels to be on the outside.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that you bring that up because it brings me like a memory my mom shared with me. 'Cause I remember parts of my childhood. I remember a lot of things, but not everything. I'm 40, like I said, I'm ancient. But we used to do these birthday parties at Discovery Zone, and I loved Discovery Zone. It was like Chuck E. Cheese, but a lot more
mhm.
physical stuff you could do. And the last party we did at Discovery Zone for me was that all the kids had canceled. So it was just me and my brother, and my
Oh
sister.
my gosh.
And it's like, you can take that situation and it can become like the hate that drives you to do whatever you need to do, because hate is a powerful motivator. And for most of my life, I was motivated by anger. And
Yeah.
I had this facade of kindness and silliness and empathy, but it was a way to try to circumvent the rage that was underneath me at all
Mhm.
times. And as I've gotten older and I've done more things. I'm very similar to you, I think. I don't have a ton of very close friends. I have a very vast network of people who like me and I get along with and I talk with them and we whatever. But I still have this desire to be alone because I just don't like people all the time because I have these just terrible memories of being so lonely. And
Mm-hmm.
as I've gotten older, it's kind of gone away. And I feel most people, as they're going through the hardest thing in their life, um, know that it will pass. It doesn't stay forever. And it's that understanding that it will end and something different will happen. And different, even if it's not better, thank God it's different because what we're doing now isn't good enough. It's not going to
Yeah.
last. So I find again, like talking with you is there's catharsis to this because these are things that you don't talk about publicly because publicly is about happiness and entertainment. It's not about the difficult things you do when the systems go off and the devices get turned off and you're
Yeah.
left in your thoughts.
Well, and to go all the way back to one of the first things you said is that, we live in a society where the expectation is that we're always in this state of happy, and that should be our natural state. Your natural state is anger minus sadness, and just live in a place of melancholy. And
Yeah.
I'm okay with that because I know that one of the one of the things that I heard about the Enneagram. I love the Enneagram. I'm a 4. We're like, we want to be special, but we don't want to be put in the spotlight. It's this constant struggle. Um, but one of the things that I was listening to a podcast about it, and they said for the 4, a truth that you need to remember when life is really hard is that this feeling is not final.
Yeah.
And I have that written down on a card on my wall. And I love that truth. There's like a couple of things I live my life by. And that one, I share that with as many people as I possibly can because it's true. And when we were talking about depression, it's like this feeling is not final. It doesn't have to be final. I
Yeah.
can make it my final one. I do have the power to do that. And I don't know that I like that power right now. I think I would like to see what comes next. And we get to have that choice and we get to spread that joy and we get to have because we've lived that and we've seen the other side and we understand and we have this new belief, right? The belief has changed. Now we can help other people with their belief and help them find that pivot point.
It's a great way to think about things and how you frame things is what really matters because the facts are the facts, but how you look at those facts, that's the thing that becomes so useful. And for
Yeah.
me, like my default is, to always think of the worst case scenario. Like that's what I think about. Like whatever someone tells me something, the first thing I do is think, what's the worst that could happen when you do something like that? And I was with my middle son, and we got a new jungle gym, and he was going around the outside of the jungle gym on the upper platform, and he made it around, no issues, and that was fine. And I was like, let me tell you about when I was a kid, because when I was a kid, I did that too. But I fell, and I fell 6 feet and I caught myself with my left arm and I snapped my radius and my ulna like sticks, and they snapped out of my body. They're still part of the skin, but the whole arm bent like an S, and I had to get a cast. And I have this. I was showing him. This is in my office. This is my cast when I was a kid. The only people that signed it were my family, and I broke my nose in the fall. I broke my wrist. I broke my arm. And it was the worst pain I'd ever felt in my entire life. The worst pain I'd ever felt in my entire life. And I remember it like it was yesterday, the pain. And then I fast forward to practicing law downtown Chicago. And I think about what I did when I practiced law downtown Chicago. And one of the things that I was doing was I was defending chemical manufacturers whose product, when you breathe it in, it smelled like butter. It was diacetyl. It smells and tastes like butter. Popcorn is what has that, and cake mixes and ever. And these people who would breathe this in could have irreversible lung damage. They would need to have, in some cases, bilateral lung transplants.
Oh my
You'd have to take
gosh.
out both lungs, put new ones in. And when you got a lung transplant, one of two things happen in 5 years. Either you die or you get
Mhm.
another lung transplant because lungs don't stay. And you'd have people in their early 30s who had lungs that were 25% what they were supposed to be. And if the people lived, Whitney, if they lived, the liability was 30 to 40 million dollars. If they don't live, it's $2 or $3 million, maybe 4 or 5. Manifestly different. And in my practice, the goal in some cases was to make the litigation last long enough so that the person who is suing you dies, because it's cheaper for my client. And I look at the pain that I dealt with and I broke my arm, and I would take that broken arm any day versus the pain that I felt as a lawyer and how I coped with my depression through alcohol. And I realized that if you are in a situation that is not sustainable, there's no value in continuing it. The value is to do something different and realize that the worst case scenario of leaving a job you hate is you find another job that you hate. And that's okay. It's okay to look in a different direction. It's not failure to say, this is not what I want to do with my life or my time or my attention. So it's a fun thing to think about, because my wife has never broken a bone, and I have broken so many bones.
Me too. I've broken, not, I wouldn't say like it's the weird things that I think I've done, and most of it was from being an idiot, but
I did backyard wrestling. I did a lot of things that I would never, ever, ever want my kids to do.
Yeah. But that's part of being a kid. Let them be wild, within bounds.
Yeah, I mean, I used to have an abandoned missile base that I would go to, and I would go underneath the ground into the abandoned silos. Like I'd take a jacket and throw it over the barbed wire fencing and climb over. I guess I did dumb things, Whitney. I don't want my kids to do any of the things that I did.
We did different types of dumb things. We did mine weren't still, because I lived out in the woods. So, did I climb certain trees that I shouldn't have and fall out of them and like have the wind knocked out of me and just not tell my parents about it until like an hour later when I could like walk again? Absolutely. More times.
The dumbest thing I ever did, I think, I have to think back, but I'll say this is probably the dumbest.
Oh, good.
We had an idea in a backyard wrestling thing to take a weightlifting glove and put lighter fluid on it, and then light the hand on fire, and then punch someone who had lighter fluid on their shirt, and then that would ignite them. And we did that. That was a very bad decision. I was fine. My hand did not get burned, but my buddy got some 2nd and 3rd degree burns on his chest and throat. It was a lot of dumb things, but again, different times, and I've learned a lot of lessons over the years.
Well, I hope that your days as a pyromaniac have subsided.
I think that they have. I've learned at 40 years old, you get to a place where you figure out what the tempo ought to be, and I think I've kind of hit the stride at this point.
That's good to know. Well, we're over time. This has been so fun, and I feel like there's so many things that we could have talked about, and for anybody that's listening, future conversations, because we dabbled into like bullying and harassment, and I feel like that's another. And it's a topic that some people are taking a hard stand on. I would love to dive into that
absolutely
at another time. But this has been wonderful, and if anybody is interested in talking with you and learning more about what you do, or maybe they just, what you said resonated and they just want somebody in their corner, how could they reach out to you?
You can find me at Matthew Leffler on LinkedIn, or you can go to my website. It's just www.armchairattorney.com. That's where you can find me and reach out to me if you have any questions or thoughts. But I appreciate the opportunity, Whitney. I can't wait to see where you take this. I am so excited for you. So if I can ever be of assistance, let me know. But you are amazing, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for your vulnerability too. And to everybody else, we'll see you next time.